Everyone tells you exports make nations rich. The historical record says something colder. Households fund the model through hidden taxes on their savings and paychecks. When inflation beats interest, your cash bleeds so the system can run. In 2023, a Tokyo family saw their electricity bill jump about 8,000 yen a month while their pay stayed flat. That's the tax. No line item on a form, just a thinner wallet every month. You don't get angry at the government, you get angry at yourself for not budgeting better. That's the trick. Here's the real story. Japan and Germany look like creditor superpowers, yet their citizens subsidize that status through higher import prices, wage restraint, and negative real returns. We'll show how Japan's US Treasury habit and Germany's €1 trillion target to claim are two versions of the same machine. If you want the unvarnished truth about surplus myths, stick around. Your paycheck is someone else's bond coupon. Okay, so basically the secret tax is when inflation runs above what you earn on your cash and bonds. Think of it like a slow haircut. You get your coupons, but the principal shrinks in purchasing power. In other words, savers and creditors, households at home and foreign holders abroad, subsidize borrowers, governments, leveraged firms, and the reserve issuer. That's the simple version. Here's what most people miss. This isn't an accident, it's policy. Governments do it on purpose. They keep interest rates low, let prices rise, and use rules to force your savings into government bonds. The simple version is you earn less than rising prices. The practical result is the state refinances itself cheaply. Exporters keep a weaker currency, and the system always finds buyers for public debt. Everything clicked when I realized negative real returns are the parking lot for surplus savings. Surplus countries must store foreign earnings somewhere deep and liquid. They don't want their currency to rise, so they recycle the proceeds into safe assets with predictable cash flows. If those assets pay less than inflation, the loss doesn't show up as a tax bill, it shows up as your future buying power going missing. Now, the Japan-Germany angle. Japan borrows in yen at home and owns dollar assets abroad. With yield curve control, Japanese government bonds sat near zero while CPI moved higher. That spread is your haircut. Meanwhile, exporters earn dollars. The Ministry of Finance and the big institutions keep those dollars in US Treasuries for safety and liquidity. Japan holds roughly $1.06 to $1.2 trillion in treasuries. The coupons are nominal. If inflation outruns them, the real value falls. Japanese households sit in deposits and pensions that are stuffed with low-yield assets. They pay through erosion. Germany's mechanism looks different, but rhymes. The euro is weaker than a standalone Deutschmark would be, an implicit subsidy for exporters and a quiet tax on consumers. Surpluses morph into external assets and, inside the bloc, into Bundesbank Target 2 credits, about €1 trillion. You don't get a check for that. You get the knowledge that your nation exchanged goods for an IOU inside the euro system, while domestic consumption sits around 50% of GDP. The spread is monetized by firms and the state. The stagnation lands on households. Here's the weird part. Nominal coupons keep everyone calm. Seniorage and real haircuts do the work. The government pays its debt at suppressed rates. Insurers and banks harvest duration carry on sovereigns. Regulation says those holdings are safe and liquid. Meanwhile, inflation does the accounting. A lot of people call this saving. What this actually means is households provide cheap funding to the system and get paid back in devalued claims. Think of it like a broken machine. You feed in cash. Each year, it spits out slightly fewer goods. The missing slice funds the model. In Japan, that shows up at the supermarket and the utility bill. In Germany, it shows up as a decade of wage restraint and underinvestment in public goods. Different paths, same destination. Negative real returns as a stealth levy. Why does this matter? Because it explains who wins and who pays. States win as real debt burdens fall. Exporters win with a weaker currency and external demand. Finance wins with captive collateral and spread. The dollar system wins because surplus nations must hold US liabilities at scale. Households pay in higher import costs, slower wage growth, and savings that don't keep up. Nobody explains this right, but the stakes are political. As Michael Pettis puts it, countries run persistent surpluses because domestic demand is too weak relative to production, which is another way of saying workers capture too little of what they produce. If you think about it, negative real returns are just the accounting expression of that imbalance. You can call it discipline, competitiveness, or prudence. The ledger calls it a tax. So where do the dollars and euros actually come from, and why do they end up as someone else's bond? Think of the global system like a plumbing network. Exports are the faucets. Dollars and euros pour in from exports, but they have to go somewhere. The only place big enough is government bonds and central bank balance sheets. It's not really a choice at that size, it's the only option that works. Japan's dollar loop is the cleanest illustration. A car ships to California, the buyer pays in dollars. Those dollars first land with the exporter's bank. The bank can sell the dollars for yen, pushing the yen up, or keep the dollars and invest them. Here's what most people miss. Policy, regulation, and portfolio math all nudge the system to hold the dollars. Why? Because dumping them for yen would strengthen the currency and choke the export engine. Therefore, institutions retain dollars and buy US Treasuries for safety and liquidity. Everything clicked when I looked at the incentives. The Bank of Japan capped JGB yields for years under yield curve control. That pinned domestic returns near zero, while CPI crept higher. Life insurers, pensions, and corporate treasurers still had to earn something on vast pools of savings. Where do you put size with minimal career risk? US Treasuries. Even hedged, the flows reinforce the same loop. Dollars earned abroad are dollars recycled into American liabilities. Japan's formal reserves and the Ministry of Finance's FX account sit on hefty piles of treasuries. Private portfolios add more. Here's how it plays out in real time. Toyota sells roughly $3 billion of cars to the US in a month. The exporter's bank converts some dollars to yen, which would push the yen up, and holds the rest. The Ministry of Finance steps in, buys those dollars, and pays out yen. Those dollars get parked in US Treasuries, earning a headline rate, while a Japanese savers bank deposit still pays about 0.1%. The dollars look safe. The saver quietly loses purchasing power. The result is structural. Japan consistently holds around $1.06 to $1.2 trillion of treasuries. The counterintuitive part is that hedging doesn't break the loop. If you hedge the currency back to yen, you pay a basis, but you still own treasuries. You funded the US government either way. Meanwhile, the BOJ's capped curve keeps the domestic alternative unattractive. In other words, managed markets, not bond vigilantes. The weak yen is just the symptom of an institutional design that channels dollars into Washington's paper. Germany's euro loop works through different plumbing, but the pressure finds the same outlet. Inside the monetary union, when a Spanish importer pays a German machinery maker, the payment clears through the euro system. If private capital doesn't flow back to Spain to fund the purchase, because markets are risk-averse or spreads are wide, the settlement happens via Target 2. The Bundesbank credits the German bank. On the other side, the Banco de España runs a liability to the euro system. Over time, Germany accumulates a mountain of claims, roughly €1 trillion, on the ECB system. It is forced lending with a friendly interface. Which brings us to the real problem. There's no independent Deutschmark to appreciate and rebalance the system. The euro's value is the average of a heterogeneous block. For Germany, that's an undervaluation versus a hypothetical DM, so surpluses persist and the euro system internalizes the financing. Outside the bloc, Germany's excess savings become external assets too, but Target 2 is the tell. You delivered goods. You got a ledger entry, not a market settlement. It feels like safety. It's actually entrapment. Lending to the debtor isn't charity, it's arithmetic. The US Treasury market and the Euro system are the only parking lots big enough to absorb these flows at scale. Regulators reinforce that preference by blessing sovereign paper as risk-free collateral, and liquidity management rules penalize straying too far. So even when yields are below inflation, the plumbing still routes the water into the same reservoirs. Here's what a stronger currency would do for households, and why it rarely happens. A stronger yen or DM equivalent euro would cheapen imports, energy, food, tradables, and force exporters to compete on productivity rather than exchange rate subsidy. But that shift would hit margins, equity valuations, and employment in the tradable sector. The diffuse benefit to consumers loses every bureaucratic fight against the concentrated pain for industry. So, the loop stays in place. Households keep paying at the store while the national balance sheet looks pristine. In other words, export surpluses are not the end state. They're the start of a chain that ends in someone else's bond. The dollars and euros don't disappear. They congeal into treasuries and target too, earning nominal coupons while inflation quietly writes the haircut. Here's the weird part. Markets applaud the clean national balance sheets those transfers create. Net foreign assets rise, safe claims pile up, and ratings look solid. Meanwhile, the typical saver is down in real terms. If you think about it, that's the whole trick. The country looks stronger because the residents accepted weaker purchasing power. That's how consumers subsidize the model. Now, let's open the household ledger, because this is where the model shows its cost. Start with energy and food, the non-negotiables. When the currency stays weak, import prices set the tone. Japan is the clean example. It imports most of its energy and a large share of its food, so a soft yen punches straight through to utility bills and groceries. Research flagged an additional 90,000 yen per year burden per household when the yen sank. Money that didn't buy anything new, just paid the exchange rate toll. That's not an abstract macro effect. That's a forced budget reallocation every month. Here's the unfair part. Big companies can protect themselves from currency swings. You can't. You just pay whatever the supermarket charges. In Japan, a long stretch of real wage declines, more than 2 years of negative real wages, made this worse. Nominal pay nudged up, living costs moved faster. The result is obvious. You dip into savings or cut discretionary spend. Either way, your balance sheet erodes. And where are those savings parked? Mostly in bank deposits and institutions that hold government paper. With policy rates pinned and inflation running higher, deposits and low-yield bonds delivered negative real returns. That's the secret tax landing in slow motion. You see the number in your account. You lose the goods it can buy. Meanwhile, the state rolls over debt cheaper, and insurers and banks collect a modest carry that regulators deem safe. Okay, now Germany. The price channel is less dramatic. The income channel does the damage. Wage restraint has been a feature, not a bug, since the labor market reforms of the 200s. Think about a German metalworker who earned 2,500 euros a month in 2003 and 2,550 euros in 2015, a 2% bump over 12 years. Productivity rose about 18% in that window, and major exporters posted record profits. His share shrank while the export machine scaled. Over 12 years, he watched his kids' school get older, his apartment need repairs he couldn't afford, and his co-workers get laid off. He kept his job. That was the deal. Accept stagnation or lose everything. The export machine needed him cheap, and it got him. Productivity kept moving, pay lagged. Over time, household consumption fell to roughly 50% of GDP, exceptionally low for a rich country. That isn't virtue. It's suppressed domestic demand. Consumers purchase fewer services, delay upgrades, accept public underinvestment as normal. The euro's structural undervaluation for Germany compounds it. Exporters enjoy the discount. households forego the stronger currency purchasing power they'd otherwise have. Here's what most people miss about pensions. They're institutionalized versions of the same problem. Japanese funds loaded up on sovereigns with capped yields or went offshore into safe foreign bonds. German funds, under strict solvency rules, also favor government paper. If inflation outpaces those coupons, retirees eat the real loss. The risk is socialized, just quietly. Your retirement check buys less, even if the nominal amount looks respectable. Think of it like a broken machine we're forced to feed. You put in a paycheck. Out comes fewer kilowatt hours, fewer calories, fewer services. The missing units fund three things: exporter margins via a weaker currency, the state's cheap financing via suppressed yields, and the reserve system's demand for safe assets. Everyone praises prudence. Your pantry says otherwise. What about wages catching up? In Japan, headline wage settlements looked promising, but after higher import prices, many workers still saw negative real gains. In Germany, recent union pushes tried to claw back purchasing power, but employers point to squeezed margins and global competition. Translation: the model only works if household income growth stays muted relative to productivity. When labor pushes, policymakers warn about competitiveness and jobs. The threat is the message. Micro-example without the drama. Your utility bill rises 12%, your nominal pay rises 3%, and your bank offers 0.2% on deposits. You cut dining out, delay dental work, and keep the old appliance another year. Aggregated across millions of homes, that's the consumption gap that shows up as a trade surplus. It looks like national success. It's households standing still. Germany's internal accounting makes the subsidy easy to miss. Exporters deliver goods. The banking system gets credited. The Bundesbank accumulates a Target 2 claim. Households don't get a dividend from that ledger entry. They get roads deferred, schools unfunded, and a tax bias towards surpluses. In Japan, the accounting is simpler but harsher. Weaker yen, higher import bills, deposits that trail CPI. Both routes deliver the same wealth transfer. Here's the weird part. Markets applaud the clean national balance sheets those transfers create. Net foreign assets rise, safe claims pile up, and ratings look solid. Meanwhile, the typical saver is down in real terms. If you think about it, that's the whole trick. The country looks stronger because the residents accepted weaker purchasing power. That's how consumers subsidize the model. So if households are footing the bill, who's cashing the checks? Four groups: the state, export corporates, domestic finance, and the dollar system that sits on top of it all. Start with the state. When inflation runs above funding costs, the real value of government debt shrinks. That's financial repression in plain clothes. Cap yields, with regulation and central bank support, tolerate moderate inflation and refinance at low nominal rates while prices do the grinding. The government doesn't have to announce a tax, it just lets depositors and bondholders absorb the haircut. In Japan, that mechanism is explicit. The Bank of Japan bought a huge share of JGBs and pinned the curve for years, while CPI finally moved. The arithmetic is cruel but effective. Germany does it differently: less curve control, more institutional bias towards sovereign paper, but the spread still accrues to the public balance sheet. Lower interest costs mean space for deficits without market revolt. The household pays in purchasing power, the sovereign gains solvency. Now, export corporations. A weak currency is an income machine. Overseas revenues translate into fatter local currency earnings. Margins look better, equity looks cheaper to foreigners. In Japan, the translation effect is the story. Dollar and euro cash piles swell when brought home, boosting profits even if unit volumes don't surge. In Germany, the undervalued euro is the permanent subsidy. It keeps pricing sharp in global markets and within the eurozone, where competitors can't devalue. This is why corporate balance sheets grow foreign assets, while domestic wage bills lag. The model channels income to firms that can scale globally. It exhales sharply. It withholds the currency dividend from consumers who would spend it at home. Banks and insurers sit in the middle and monetize the spread. They hold sovereign bonds as risk-free collateral because the rulebook says so. With yields suppressed, the carry looks modest, but it's durable and balance sheet friendly. You lever the safest assets, collect duration income, and pledge them for funding. Life insurers and pensions meet regulatory hurdles with long sovereign duration, which only works if the state keeps yields low relative to growth and inflation. That's the quiet pact. Households accept lower real returns. Financial institutions harvest stable income. The state retains funding control. Nobody rings a bell when inflation takes the rest. Which brings us to the dollar system. The United States enjoys what de Gaulle called an exorbitant privilege, but the modern version is more mechanical. Surplus nations need a parking lot big enough for their savings. Only treasuries and agencies scale to that need with liquidity on demand. So Japan and its insurers, pensions and FX authorities end up holding roughly $1 trillion plus in treasuries. They aren't doing Washington a favor, they're maintaining their own model. But the effect is identical. Lower US borrowing costs than would otherwise prevail, deeper dollar markets, and a reinforced reserve role. When inflation outruns treasury coupons, foreign holders eat a real loss. That's a cross-border tax dressed up as safe income. Germany's version runs through the euro system. Target 2 converts private reluctance to lend into official balances. The Bundesbank books a claim. Deficit central banks book liabilities. It feels like a harmless ledger. It's vendor finance at the sovereign level. Adjustment gets pushed outward, not through a stronger German currency, but through system credit. Exporters keep selling. The currency stays weak for Germany. Households never see the purchasing power that a revalued DM would have delivered. Here's the kicker. These winners are locked into the structure they profit from. The state relies on the repression spread. Corporates rely on the currency edge. Finance relies on captive, regulatory-approved collateral. The dollar system relies on their need for a safe, bottomless asset. That's why fixing it is always later. The gains are concentrated and organized. The losses are diffuse and quiet. And the machine keeps running.
Look, if the model hurts households, why not flip the switch? Because the switch is wired to everything that matters: balance sheets, jobs, geopolitics, and the plumbing we just walked through. Start with currency risk. A stronger yen or a Germany-only currency would crush exporters' margins overnight. In Japan, a rapid yen rise would reprice overseas earnings lower, hit equity valuations, and tighten financial conditions. Firms that borrowed or hedged, assuming stable rates, would face losses the moment cross-currency basis and hedge costs snap the other way. In Germany, a DM equivalent revaluation would slice price competitiveness inside and outside Europe. The political pain is immediate and concentrated. The consumer benefit is diffuse and delayed. Guess which one dominates policy meetings? Now the balance sheet mismatches. Corporations, insurers, and pensions are positioned for the status quo. Japanese life insurers hold long foreign bonds. A fast yen spike can shred reported solvency if hedges lag. Exporters with dollar revenue and yen costs would watch the translation tailwind evaporate. Public books are just as exposed. Japan's government debt is huge but domestically held, with the BOJ sitting on an enormous stock of JGBs. If yields jump while growth slows, the math breaks for budgets and for the central bank's mark-to-market, even if it never realizes the loss. In the Eurozone, Target 2 is the institutionalization of the mismatch. Germany's claim is only as good as the Union. Any move that forces real settlement exposes latent credit risk the politics can't admit. The problem is decades old. Factories, supply chains, and jobs were built around a weak currency. You can't rebuild that overnight. If the currency jumps, margins get hit, assets get stranded, and unemployment rises. Policymakers know this. That's why they choose a slow hit to household buying power instead of a sudden shock to companies. So they bleed you slowly instead. A 90,000 yen annual household burden in Japan. A decade of wage stagnation in Germany. Delayed dental work, skipped vacations, kids who don't go to college because the money isn't there. The pain is spread across millions of people and decades, so no one person feels the knife. But it adds up. Your parents paid it. You're paying it. Your kids will too, unless something breaks. Institutional incentives are aligned against change. Ministries, central banks, and export lobbies are organized and credible. Households are fragmented. Regulators define safe assets in ways that funnel savings to sovereigns and the euro system. Bank and insurer solvency frameworks reward duration in government paper. Wage councils and social partners internalize competitiveness. The result isn't a conspiracy, it's a bureaucracy that treats surpluses as prudence and consumption as indulgence. As Pettis argues, persistent surpluses are a symptom of workers claiming too small a share of what they produce. Reversing that is a political fight, not a technocratic tweak. Euro architecture adds a steel door. Germany can't revalue a currency it doesn't issue. Internal rebalancing, higher German wages, more public investment, and higher inflation in the core relative to the periphery would help, but it's politically toxic and runs into the black zero mindset. Target 2 removes market pressure by elastically financing deficits. That buys time. It doesn't create incentives to adjust. Then there's geopolitics. Japan's treasury holdings are not just portfolio choices, they're part of alliance management. Dollar liquidity, swap lines, and security guarantees live in the same file as macro stability. Selling treasuries at scale would be read as a strategic signal, not an asset allocation shift. Germany is similarly embedded. Euro solidarity, ECB policy, and intra-EU politics constrain any unilateral move that weakens the export machine or questions Target 2's sanctity. What about escape valves? There are 3 on paper. 1. Productivity-led revaluation. Invest so much in tradable sector efficiency that you can afford a stronger currency without losing share. That takes time and risks transitional unemployment. 2. Raise the social wage and tilt income back to households. Bigger transfers, stronger bargaining, more public investment. That dents corporate margins and shifts the political center of gravity. 3. Pivot to domestic demand. Services, housing upgrades, and infrastructure renewal. That requires abandoning the fetish for external surpluses and tolerating a smaller net foreign asset build. Each path creates near-term losers who can veto the move. So the model persists. Negative real returns supply the lubricant. Weak currencies protect exporters. Official balance sheets absorb imbalances, and households keep paying, precisely because stopping would force the system to recognize losses that policy has deferred for decades.
Here's what most people miss about safe assets. When the reserve issuer runs inflation above its bond yields, it's not just domestic savers who take the hit. Foreign creditors do too. That's a cross-border tax without a vote. Okay, so basically, think of treasuries as the toll booths of the dollar system. Surplus nations pile into them because scale and liquidity leave no alternative. But if headline CPI runs higher than coupons, the real value of those claims shrinks over time. In other words, the US can levy a real haircut on global creditors simply by tolerating inflation while keeping term yields contained by credibility, regulation, and demand for collateral. The simple version is this. Japan's trillion-dollar treasury book collects nominal interest. Inflation does the rest. During episodes when inflation outruns treasury yields, the real coupon turns negative. The holder is paid back in dollars that buy less. That loss is the price of participating in the dollar system. It looks like prudence on national balance sheets. It functions like seigniorage in practice. Everything clicked when we connect it back to the surplus loop.
Why do Japan and Germany accept this? Because the alternative, letting their currencies appreciate, would crush their export models. They buy the bonds to keep the exchange rate where industry wants it and to store savings in instruments regulators deem risk-free. Liquidity monopoly, not charity. And that's the point. The dollar system extracts a fee in the form of periodic real losses, and surplus countries keep paying because the model needs it to survive. Germany's channel is different, but rhymes. Inside the Eurozone, the Target 2 mechanism turns private risk aversion into central bank IOUs. Outside the bloc, German excess savings still find their way into foreign assets. If inflation burns real value along the way, whether via treasuries held by euro institutions or through euro-wide inflation that erodes the purchasing power of cross-border claims, the effect is the same. Creditors absorb a stealth loss to keep the machine liquid. Here's the weird part. The very behavior that protects the export model reinforces the dollar's dominance. When Japanese insurers, pensions, and the Ministry of Finance keep buying treasuries for safety and liquidity, they deepen the market, lower US borrowing costs, and entrench the reserve role. That makes it easier for the US to run deficits, which makes it easier for the rest of the world to sell into US demand, which in turn creates more dollars that must be recycled into treasuries. That's the feedback loop. They fund the buyer and get repaid in devalued claims whenever inflation spikes. Nobody explains this right, but it's not a conspiracy. It's plumbing plus incentives. Regulators bless sovereign paper as the top-tier asset. Collateral frameworks, liquidity rules, and market depth do the rest. Even when managers hedge currency risk, the underlying allocation still finances the issuer. The hedge doesn't stop the system from taxing you through inflation, it just shifts which desk books the P&L. Case parallels make the pattern obvious. Japan's treasury habit is the external face of its weak yen model. Germany's €1 trillion Target 2 claim is the internal face of euro architecture. Different wiring, same outcome. Surplus economies extend credit to deficit economies, and when inflation's higher than yields, they get paid back in smaller bites of purchasing power. As Pettis would put it, this isn't about virtue in trade, it's about distribution, within countries and between them. Workers and savers in surplus countries underconsume so that others can overconsume. The accounting shows up as foreign assets on the national balance sheet. The economics show up as a tax on those assets when inflation runs. What this actually means for you is straightforward. If your nation's model depends on permanent surpluses, your retirement account is indirectly long someone else's promises. Those promises are safe until the issuer needs growth more than your real return. Then, the haircut arrives quietly, via CPI prints and stable nominal coupons. You won't get a memo, you'll get a thinner basket of goods.
The simple version is this. Persistent surpluses aren't strength, they're suppressed consumption. And the hidden tax lands on households while states, exporters, finance, and the reserve issuer monetize the spread. If you want more than talking points, follow the flows. Watch Japan's treasury holdings, Germany's Target 2 balance, real wages versus productivity, and whether inflation outruns deposit and bond yields. Don't let the clean national balance sheets distract you from the household hit. Subscribe for the next deep dive, Target 2, line by line, and cut through the noise with us.